again, the most important update Bryce and I have done in the last probably 15 years.
This is nothing more than collecting tax, giving people on a lower down on the socioeconomic ladder less opportunities to get ahead.
Well, this is almost like a death tax plus.
You're tuning in to The Property Couch, Australia's #1 property, finance and money podcast. Featuring the titans of the industry since 2015, we're trusted by tens of thousands of investors on their journey to financial peace. This show is powered by More.
Thanks, Opti. Yes, and welcome back to another edition of the #1 property podcast in Australia, The Property Couch. And have we got a surprise for you? Bryce Holdaway.
Hello, mate. How good is it to be back?
Oh, like it just feels
would
like
have been nice under better circumstances, but here we are.
We have a huge show today, don't we? I mean, ultimately, big news.
Yeah.
It's hot off the press. So we're recording the morning after the federal budget announcements and obviously the significant changes in respect to property. There's a lot of people that need a lot of advice. So we're going to do our best in terms of we've got everything sort of sitting here as we're going through lots of questions from our amazing community. We've got obviously a fair bit to get through.
Yeah.
But before we do, mate, I mean, it's. Can we just talk about Freo quickly?
Because how long has it been since we talked about the footy?
It's so good. It's so good. I mean, I haven't been able to talk about it.
I know.
So
just want to take it 1 week at a time.
Keep a lid on it.
Well, the only good thing that I really want to talk about is where you are in comparison to Freo. Let's be honest. And we weren't on the mic together when we took that amazing pack mark in the wet in Adelaide, but
to save the game.
But today's a very serious topic,
it is.
And thanks for having me back on. I think it's this is probably the biggest change in our on the positive, sort of on the negative side since we've been investing. So it was important that we came and had a chat. But Jim Chalmers, Ben, has said it's the most important and ambitious budget in decades, and ambitious is one thing, but I think we should premise today by saying a couple of things. One, it got delivered 15 hours ago.
Yeah.
So you and I are still, we're putting, this is our fast thinking response.
Through it.
And we'll do a slow thinking response as well. Yep. And two, it hasn't been passed. It's just, it has to go through the Senate. It has to be passed. And three, I think we've been here before. Like you and I have had lots of conversations around these sorts of changes back in 2016 and 2019, and here we are in 2026. So it's not as if we haven't touched on some of these points before, but the only difference now is it's no longer theory or taking it to an election. We've been ambushed, Ben. We've been midterm some of these changes that only 12, 15 months ago, the Prime Minister said for the 50th time, we won't touch negative gearing, and here we are.
Well, I think, look, so I don't want to spend too much time on the politics, but make no mistake, this is a political budget, and it's trying to win the voters who are trying to get into the property market. They're seeing the demographic shift of the baby boomers moving out, and now the biggest cohort of voters. And so when, I originally did a piece to camera for Picker talking about the potential changes and what was coming, and everyone initially said, they won't change it. No. Well, here we are. We are where we are. So, I mean, it obviously from an integrity, from a trust point of view, it's the third big promise that they've broken. Yeah. So I think that that's something that they're going to have to live with, and they'll be voted by judges. But let's just the way in which I want to play this is what we've got in front of us. It may change in terms of legislative. There might be some tweaks to it, but I think given obviously the balance of power they have in the lower house and also with the support of the Greens, most of this is pretty much going to get through. Now, of course, we're doing this before the Liberal reply and what One Nation is also going to be thinking about and the Teals are going to be thinking about. So I suspect that there is going to be a divide here, and voters will be able to then think about that, when it comes 2028. Because we have seen tax reform repealed, but that's the politics.
I think there'll be a group of people that are celebrating today, Ben, which is the younger generation who feel like there's inequity in getting into the property play. But I think what will play out, and I think the message to anyone who's listening who fits that sort of demographic profile is, I think your victory will be short-lived.
Yeah.
For all the reasons we've talked about for the last 200 episodes, Ben,
Yeah.
I think your victory will be short-lived, and we're going to go into some of the reasons why we think that's the case. But it certainly is. I guess we should probably talk about, just quickly go off some of the things that are changing. The negative gearing changes, obviously, from the 12th of May, 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. If you hadn't entered into a contract, you then no longer were able to work under the old rules. You have a 12-month, period that if you wanted to, negative gear for a year and then sell before the changes come, you could do that from the 1st of July.
Yeah, they're referring to it as a
2027.
transition.
Yeah,
and they've got to get the legislation through. There's a lot of changes here.
But I think it's going to lock people in. Like in terms of freeing up supply, a lot of people say, good investors will leave and another spot for an owner-occupied. That's fine. But I think it's going to lock, all the people that had all of the pre-1985 benefits, they were holding on for dear life because they didn't want to lose those. And now there's a cohort of people who have got the benefits of having rules prior to the budget night, and I think they'll lock those in, and most people will want to try and hold on for dear life. But it will change the landscape of property, and we'll talk about that.
And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to sort of look at it, where the behaviours are going to go, and where the fundamental things haven't changed. Like, as Warren Buffett would always talk about, in terms of a Snickers bar is always a Snickers bar, and it'll always be a popular bar, and Coca-Cola will always be a popular brand, and they've got pricing power. So I think that's what we've got to be thinking about in terms of short term. You're going to see some behavioural change, but then over the long term, it's the voting machine versus the weighing machine. And I think it's important to understand that in 1999, when they did make the change, in terms of the capital gains 50% exemption, because remember, Keating brought in capital gains tax in 1985, right? And also made changes to negative gearing, and then adjusted those because for 2 years because they could see that was impacting, especially Sydney. Rentals were going higher, and obviously that was the market that he spent most of his time in, so he made some adjustments there. So it's fair to say that by design, those tax settings were favourable. They were favourable for this concept of being able to build wealth and build out that. So that's true. What have we moved from to where we are now? Well, obviously less favourable, but you might ask more balanced in the sense that what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring up the tax that you pay on wealth creation. And what they should have tried to do is bring down income earning tax, but no, they've left that high, and they're just basically recalibrating the wealth tax that we pay on our capital earnings, and that's the problem here, right? So we'll be going into that in another podcast with Evan and the chief economist of Bendigo Bank next week. So we'll be unpacking the broader budget then. But for me, so I've made an initial assessment in terms of what's going to happen over a long period of time. So we've moved from a favourable selling more now to a balance setting. So no matter what asset class I'm going to buy into, I'm going to roughly be paying similar types of taxes if I sell and realise any gains. So I then come back to, okay, what's the superpower of property? The superpower of property is still leverage in terms of how I'm able to control a higher value.
Yep.
And, then I'm going to be asking myself, is there going to be different types of markets? Like what are the markets over the long term where the value shows up in the land versus what are the markets in the long term where I might be chasing income but not necessarily getting value out of the land and the economic moats associated with that. So,
and also groups of people that are going into certain markets en masse, therefore on a low base, artificially influencing, so people have a look, have the look on paper that they're creating an enormous amount of wealth. That's a good point. They are vulnerable as well. But we talked about the negative gearing changes, Ben. The CGT changes. People would have seen some of these things happening over the last couple of days. So when this comes out. But the 50% discount's been abolished. It's been replaced by the cost base indexation. Ben, I've actually done this in real practice. So
you used to do them
because my first accounting role was in 1998, which so obviously pre-1999. And so I used to have to get the master tax guide at the time. There was a table at the back, and I had to work out the indexation number when they sold, the indexation number when they bought, do a division, multiply that by the gain. So I've been involved in and it was onerous, and the tax accountants across the country are very excited about that, as are the valuers from the 1st of July
Well,
next
the
year.
valuers are going to be interesting.
Will they be able to keep up, Ben, with the amount of valuations that need to be done? But look, the CGT 50% has been gone. There's some transitional rules that we just touched on before. And so existing property, just so it's clear for all of our audience, existing properties before 12th of May 2026, that's 7:30, budget delivery, fully grandfathered and exempt from all the changes.
For the negative gearing, yes. For the
CGT,
capital, no. So for the CGT, effectively what's happening there is that once you get your valuation on the 30th of June or the 1st of July, that will have the 50%.
Yes.
And then obviously the indexation from that.
So there'll be a bit of sort of working out a bit of this, and did you apply under that, and then pro-rata from here. So it's going to get very, very complex.
Which leads me into one of the first areas that I have concerns about, right?
Yep.
So if someone is been trading in property and they're being taught that, through buyers agency groups and so forth, that we're going to go into certain markets and we're going to run the price up and then we're going to cash out, take that profit and go again. There's a real problem there, because to your point around the listings and those markets, and I've been pretty vocal on social media on this.
Yeah. But I guess for it's kind of very naive for someone in one of those markets to think, oh, maybe it's time for me to sell, to not think that one of their mates, and all of a sudden there's 8, 9, 10 properties up for sale, and then all of a sudden that just drops the price, the floor just comes out, and then so therefore we will see who's been swimming naked, because you and I were talking about that being a dangerous move. But when everything's going great and there's just a lot of hubris in the market and everyone's just like, they're going, what do you two know? You two are just dinosaurs. What would you know?
Yes.
But ultimately, we will see what that looks like very, very soon.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go deeper on this, Bryce, in an upcoming webinar. So on Tuesday, the 26th of May, 7:30 p.m, details are in the show descriptions, thepropertycouch.com.au/register now. I will be talking, and it will be an extensive session, because effectively my intention is to take you through a really fundamental understanding of the markets and the dynamics. So we're going to be talking about who are buyers, what is buyer depth, and what does that mean? Then we're going to be talking about what are the short-term economic drivers, and then what are the long-term economic drivers. And there's some stuff in here, Bryce, that I've never shared before in terms of how we think about those things. So we're giving away even more of our intellectual property in that. Now, for our beautiful valued customers, make no mistake, we are thinking deeply about you at the moment. So you get to go the night before. Now, because a lot of our existing customers do not have properties in remote regional areas, which is where we see the exposure and the risk, I won't need to talk much about that. I'll probably cover it off very briefly. But for those people, which brings us back to that point. Now, of course, there's no registration for our clients. They will get an exclusive invite via email. If you haven't received an email from us, please reach out to us, because we need to make sure that your email is verified so we can actually deliver email to you. It's super important that this is, again, the most important update I have done, and Bryce and I have done, in the last probably 15 years. So please get along to that session, because it's going to be incredibly informative for you. And I just want to pick up on your point, Bryce. So when just to quickly, for those people who are in those remote regional areas and they've been taught to trade properties, they're all thinking the same thing. And that is, well, if everyone else is thinking I need to get out,
let's get out.
And the shallowness in the market, we're already seeing it in the data, mate.
Well, Dan White from the Ray White Group talks to this point, Ben. He goes, limiting negative gearing to new builds assumes rental supply is interchangeable. It is not. A new apartment in an outer growth corridor does not replace a rental home near a school, hospital, or train line. Regional markets are especially exposed. Many simply don't have the development pipelines to absorb this kind of policy shock.
And, I'll explain to people about the inverse relationship with land and improvements. And in capital cities, the land holds the greater value, and the dwelling improvements, even the new builds, are usually less than the land, and if they're not, run a mile from an investment point of view.
Yeah.
But in regional areas, the land is cheaper, and it's priced cheaper because of the economic moat, and the economic flywheel is just not as strong. So you get this inverse relationship where the land to asset ratio is 60% in the improvements and only 40% in the land. That's problematic. So and
we've got an exclusive today too, Ben.
Yes,
we've got an exclusive because we need to wind back something that we have long held on the property couch, and we're just going under the new regime. It's just not true.
Yeah.
And that's when we used to talk about location doing 80% of the heavy lifting. That is just not true anymore. So we just want to wind that back. Location now does 90% of the heavy lifting because under this regime, we'll talk about some reasons why. But let's circle back to the end because for as long as this podcast has been going, we've said it's done most of the heavy lifting. It is now more important than ever.
Yeah. It is, and I mean the principles that we've expressed and theosized, and all of the things that we've done in terms of, if that's a word,
theosized. I like it,
to try and get people to understand owner-occupier appeal, and as investors, we should always be price takers, not price makers. In regional markets, unfortunately, they have been the price maker in the last 2 or 3 years. So that's the tide going out swimming naked. So owner-occupier appeal, economic activity, human interest, and human behaviour. We're going to go deeper than we've ever gone in terms of those explanations, and in the academic theory that's also in the economic papers that I've read over the journey to sort of bring that to life. So that probably for me is when I'm if people are like saying, well, tell us what we should do, because that's what they're sort of saying. If you're an existing investor and you've got properties in great locations, and you've now got the grandfathering and negative gearing, and ultimately you get to lock in the value of the on the 1st of July 2027, and then you get indexing after that with a minimum of 30%. So that's something we've just got to be mindful of. But if your plan was to buy and hold, then I don't think that changes much. I can't say cut blanket, because everyone's circumstances are different. But that's
we wrote a book, Ben, together, our third one, which was designed to be evergreen, and it doesn't get too much of a hammering at all under these changes, because it was still only to buy a couple of properties. Combine that with your super, and I guess for those people, what it does mean, what these changes mean, is that the people that it was designed to protect the most will be in trouble, because it won't fix the housing. No. And what it will mean is you as an investor from today onwards, what you used to rely on when you would charge your rent is the fact that you'd get a little bit of tax relief, so you would factor that into your price. Well, now that no longer exists, and for you to be able to hold these properties, you actually have to charge an increased amount of rent. And so what that'll mean is, because there's a couple of scenarios. This from this point going forward, you'll have there'll be no new established property supply in the market, and from this point going backwards, there will be a bunch of people who will throw their bat and ball out of the cot and go, I don't want to play this game anymore. So they will sell. And so some people will go, oh, that's great. That means that a new owner-occupier enters the market. Well, what that actually means is the supply of rental property in the areas around the hospitals and the train stations and the schools and the built-up areas will be as diminished as it's ever been. And so that's where people want to rent, and their rents will actually go up. And guess what? If you are actually trying to save a deposit to buy a house as a first-home owner, you're now probably going to have to pay more rent in the area that you want to live, or move much further out where you don't want to live. And by the way, a lot of young people were buying exchange-traded funds as a way, or shares, or anything to do with the equities market, as a way to, instead of putting their deposit in the bank, they put their deposit into some form of investment arrangement, so that they could accelerate the building of the deposit quicker, or they would do rent vesting. That's gone now. So it's actually, there's nothing in the budget that actually helped prices go down. All they said is the rate of increase will slow down. So they're not getting cheaper. And any mechanisms that you had in place to try and bridge the biggest gap that is the problem right now for any young person who wants to get into the property market is how on earth do I get a deposit? Well, the CGT changes just made that even harder.
Yeah, so that's the unintended consequence that you're talking about, right? So when you try and manipulate a free market economy, you get these unintended consequences. So explaining that in simple terms, we're going to have a new breed of property spruikers that will be,
It's a field day for them.
The existing ones who have been selling brand new,
Yeah.
they're having a good day today in their minds.
They're having long lunches today.
They're thinking, great, I'm going to make my 50% commission, $50,000 commissions on all of these new
bottles
builds.
of champagne for lunch, everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's on me.
So we're gonna to Bryce's point, you play the behavioural point out. If unsuspecting consumers fall for their pitch, which is let's buy a house and land package, those house and land package, when I sell off a stock list, they are in new build areas. So they're in greenfield subdivisions, and there's always lots of vacant land out there. And so you're going to be buying an investment property like potentially hundreds of others if they are susceptible to this dumb idea. And then so there's going to be a glut of rental properties in those areas.
And don't forget, when you buy it and then you want to put it back on the market, guess who can't buy it off you?
Yes, another investor.
And guess who doesn't want to buy it in the first place? Owner-occupiers.
Yeah, or a smart investor.
Yeah.
So expect to see the reintroduction of rental guarantees that will be priced into the value that you pay. So there'll be 1, 2, 3 year rental guarantees to stimulate you to put your money down to buy one of these properties. And then every one of those will fall off at the same time. So the rental market will collapse in that particular space.
So what you're saying, Ben, is go and do another lap of our first 100 episodes just so that you make sure you know what you're about to deal with.
So, I mean, we're fixing bad property advice for people who are told to buy in trusts. That's now a dud idea. And so, we warn people about that, and I'll put a package together in a future episode where we cut into, all the time, all the warnings that we made about the things, and they're now coming true, because it feels like we're making a second round of fixing bad property advice.
Yeah.
But so as a renter, you're going to have tremendous choice on the fringes of the city where there's no primary schools built yet, there's no decent public transport, there's nothing out there. Or you get to live in a high density apartment in the city or on the fringe of the city.
Yeah.
So there will be so those rents will be controlled, and the outer suburb areas will be controlled, but there will be this big hollowing out of the middle suburbia, and so there will be a rental premium in those locations over time. Now, we do know, it's probably a good little segue into this concept of new builds, and there was some interesting stuff inside the Treasury notes. I think they've done an okay job of thinking a little bit about this, but you're just not going to get the level of supply potentially. People will see this as a business opportunity, so there will be these new small-time developers and people that see this as an opportunity, and that is that what their grounding is this, that they want to reward capital that funds supply. So the hypothetical scenario here is I buy an existing 1950s post-war bungalow in maybe Yarraville, Seddon, on a reasonable bit of dirt, say 600 square metres of dirt, and I buy that, and then I knock it over and I build a duplex. And so if I've funded that capital supply and built that duplex, then potentially I get the opportunity to negatively gear that, and I also get the option of the 50% because it falls under what they call the new build status as part of that. So if you are the funder of that supply, then ultimately you do get this opportunity around new builds. And so I know you mentioned it earlier.
Well, let's talk about that too, Ben, though, because the intergenerational inequity was what this budget was all about, right?
Yep.
But who can do what you just did?
Yeah.
A boomer with equity,
Correct.
Who's got the I was going to use the balls to actually take on the amount of debt that's required to turn one house into two, and then be able to fund that in an increasing interest rate environment. But if they do that, they will be rewarded handsomely because they actually hold the best land. But if you've got a young person, they can't do that. They don't have the resources to do that.
No.
And what about middle Australia who want to invest? They've now been locked out of that hollowed middle ring that you just talked about. So the inequity to them is enormous, and it doesn't fix the housing issue because the rhetoric that we got from Chalmers, every interview that he did in the lead up was, we understand supply is the problem, but there's nothing in here that's actually helped anyone get onto the ladder. All it's done is given them an opportunity to collect more tax because we don't have a cost of living crisis, we have a cost of government crisis.
Yep.
And then they're not doing anything to stop the amount of people coming here. So the bath will continue to overflow because the amount of tax revenue base that they get from just the ordinary worker paying tax is a very significant part of the taxation revenue that they receive. So this is nothing more than collecting tax, giving people on a lower down on the socioeconomic ladder less opportunities to get ahead, and the people who already have the money, winners always win, Ben. They'll find ways, but it's only the people with resources will be able to find ways.
Yeah, we won't go deep into the loopholes, but we'll try and spend a little bit of time at the end to have just a couple of scenarios there. But I want to pick up on what you're saying. The Treasury modelling suggests that under these settings for supply, so remember when I said the tax settings were favourable? They were favourable under the current the model as of Monday, not the model as of Wednesday, to increase supply. The Treasury modelling declares that this is going to have a 30 to 35,000 less supply under this model, and they're saying that this will allow 75,000 new first home buyers to get into the market in the next decade. And they are saying that it'll have a 2% impact on prices. Now, that's like saying the ASX 200 moves by 2%. But if I own CSL, well, they dropped by 16% over the last week. So there's going to be winners and losers when it comes into that. So that's number one. I don't buy into that 2%. There will be markets that will have double-digit falls off the back of this, and there will be other markets that will do quite well out of it. So that's the other part. And then they have the modelling that suggests it's only going to have a $2 a week impact on rents. Now, again, sure, because if I've got an extra 10,000 high-rise apartments for rent, and I've got potentially, so if you wash it all out overall across Australia, $2 a week.
Yeah.
But I don't live all over Australia.
No.
I live in middle suburbia of a international city. My rents are going to go up, and they are going to go up strongly because I am going to substitute what I've potentially lost over here in terms of the potential future capital gain, because I need, again, I've said this in the past, as an investor, you're looking for a risk-adjusted return, right? And you're looking for a rate that's better than the no risk. So, and if the no risk 10-year bond rate is 5 or 6%, if you're going to invest money, you want a better rate of return than that. So if I don't get a rate of return of 7, 8, 9, 10%, why would I take the risk?
Yeah,
so that's the risk on ultimate future supply. So I'm really quite concerned about that. And I want to also pick up on your point around the people that's going to hurt the most. High net worth individuals, double household income people, happy days. There's nothing.
You've got slight adjustments to make, but you can still get on with it.
Like, of course, I'm going to have to find additional amount.
Yeah,
like,
but they're the
might
ones who
cost
can
me
do
an
it.
extra 8 or 10 grand in cash flow.
Yeah.
To get in.
But they see the bigger picture.
But that's right. But if I'm a single nurse, a teacher, single person, you have robbed me of the opportunity. And to your point, yes, I will get negatively geared share investing, but oh my God, putting leverage into the share market.
Yeah, with margin calls.
Like, no investment advice here, people, but I'm actually talking it down, so that's not advice. So you might get that, but to your point, you're going to get whacked on the capital gain when you sell that, because that's the deposit that you're trying to do. So everyone's sort of saying, well, what should you have done? I mean, this is what I get asked from a picker point of view. And I'm saying, look, if you want to, if this is a supply problem, and it is, then you need to get rid of red tape regulations, reduce the taxes that you're charging, where 50% of the new builds is in taxes and charges, right? Number one, do the right thing around modular homes and do the changes around all the requirements in terms of build requirements. We've gone over the top in terms of all of the extra compliance and so forth. So we should have different ratings for different types of homes. So if you build a modular home, it won't necessarily have all the specs and regulation needs and that type of thing. So there should be easier, cheaper homes to build. That's the first thing.
Here's the big question is what actually is the pathway now for young people to get ahead?
Yep.
Like if you acknowledge that the market isn't going to drop, so the prices aren't going to come down, if you have now taken CGT rules away that disincentivize them to try and invest their way to a deposit, and if they don't have any family line wealth to tap into, what is the path ahead for those people? Like I wonder if one of the reasons that the Costello changes in '99 with the capital gains tax was to make us internationally competitive, because as a taxation system, Australia is not internationally competitive. You go to our neighbours with Singapore, you can even go to China, you can go to the US, even our neighbours over the ditch. They have much more enticing tax system to invite investment into our country. And I just wonder if it's made Australia less competitive, because if you were, there's startup, talk of changing around the fringes to incentivize those. But for people who are, like, you only have to go to the UK, there are wealthy people in droves leaving that country, leaving England, and going to other places under the guise of go where you're treated best. So to think that taxing wealthy people, you got to tax they just go back to what Kerry Packer said back in the 80s, when he said, if you don't do everything you need to do to minimise your tax, you
need your head read.
That's what wealthy people do.
Yes.
Winners always win, so they find ways around it. So it's not impacting the wealthy people.
No.
It's impacting the people who can't afford to be impacted the most.
Yeah, and so picking up on, again, when they asked me, well, what should we have done? Well, we would have had a tapered system around capital gains tax. That's absolutely true. So fix the red tape and the bureaucracy in terms of getting supply in shovel-ready areas. So you're still moving that, but you've got to still keep the incentive. If the incentive's not there for the investor to come in, guess who has to build it? The government. Now, what we know of this Labor government and what we know of, the spin machine that is the politics in this, they will be talking up all of the increases in approvals and those types of things, because there will be a spike. Again, you show me the incentive and I'll show you the behaviour. So it will be our job, in terms of warning people about the risks of investing in new. And we know through our data, and there'll be other data coming out from obviously a lot of other people who have played in the space. I've had conversations with several of them, that in the data it suggests that new builds perform at around 1.5 to 2% less return in, say, a typical 10-year period. So that tells you that the reason why you invest in existing is because you get a better return. And that all brings back to people to this question. This question is still going to be the same question. So Pippa Investor Sentiment Survey, and I'll be putting this in the presentation that I deliver as well, but I analysed the 2016, the 2019, I think it was the 2022 or 23, and then the 2025 Investor Sentiment Survey for the simple question in terms of, in investing in property, what are you expecting? You're expecting a capital growth return, number one. Number two is long-term passive income. Number three was short-term growth. Number four was short-term yield. And number five, the lowest of the five choices.
For tax benefit.
Right. So people understand that. Now, the question is going to be, in what markets will capital growth be impacted? And that's what I'll be prosecuting in my webinar that will be coming up, because the reality is, in a very simple sense, that if you show me a very, very strong, massive economy, I'll show you very, very expensive land. and people want to live in that city or that world. That's what they've got to bring to the table, and they get to bring that to the table because they earn high income. So that's just a little teaser in terms of what that looks like. But that's what we're dealing with here. So it is going to be, you could argue that the Labor and the Greens over the last 4 or 5 years have won the narrative around greedy property investors.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They've pitched a narrative and a storyline that, to your point, Bryce, has fed this belief from those people that they've been locked out of the property market because of these greedy property investors, and the reality is going to be that that's not the truth in terms of what's happening in the marketplace. Yes, there has been speculation by certain property investors,
and they've spoiled it for everyone.
We were on, the conditions were favourable, but it's a bit like sort of going to a dam and instead of catching a couple of fish that you need to feed yourself on and leave the rest of the fish, like good people do, for tomorrow.
Yep.
They went in there and they bought all the fish, they ripped them out, and now there's no fish. And so we've had to change the rules off the back of that. And I think that's an important message to sort of say, okay, the rules are changing, but what still remains true in terms of short term versus long term.
Ben, I haven't spoken too much politically over the life of this podcast personally, but I think it's kind of a turning. I think it's a turning point for Labor. You only have to look on the weekend to see the shift towards One Nation, and it doesn't matter what you think about that. Just the electorate, like we've gone from, I was talking to you this before we recorded. We've gone from keynote after keynote after keynote with our good friend Bernard Sold.
Yep.
And he talked about how there's a major shift away from the two major political parties.
Yes.
And the Labor Party have operated with enormous swagger in the fact that they've got 94 seats and their opposition is on the back foot. But I don't think it's a conversation about which of the two major parties anymore. I think it's the beginning of the decline where more of the independents, more of the Pauline Hanson, more of the seats will be decided at the next election. It'll take some time, but whether you love Pauline Hanson, whether you love Donald Trump, or whether you hate them, you cannot accuse them of not being authentic. And I think the electorate is attracted towards that authenticity, and younger people will soon find out that, again, there's cause for celebration at a headline level today.
Yep.
But once they realise all the things that we've just spoken about, harder to get in, the game's been played, I can't do rent vesting, I can't do my ETFs, my rents have gone up, all of a sudden they'll get disillusioned. Yep. And they'll gravitate towards the person who's being more authentic.
Make no mistake, and I mentioned this on the important videos that I did earlier as the chair of PICA in February when we knew that the rumours were getting stronger around changes in negative year in capital gains tax. Political parties do everything they can to stay in power, right? So
that is the currency.
That is the currency. And for every good reason, Bryce, because at the end of the day, they honestly believe that they are doing the right thing by the nation.
Yeah.
They think that helping the most needy and potentially having middle class welfare is the right thing for the country, right?
But the challenge has been that a lot of the people that are making the decisions have never taken the risk that you and I have.
Of course not. They've career
never
politicians.
employed people. Yeah, but that's important.
No, I know. Like Pauline Hanson's worked in a fish and chip shop. These people have never worked. These are career politicians. I don't disagree with you there, but they look at these things. They look at the biggest issues. The biggest issues at the moment are housing and cost of living. Cost of living's gone back to number one. And so this is going to be their big test. Their big test is going to be, they have told you that these policy settings will fix housing. Now, the question, and you will judge them when you put your vote down. So you'll either be if you're a swinging voter, you'll either be a one-issue voter. So this could be the issue that you vote for, or you'll be a broader voter in terms of, based on the sum of the parts of what they're offering me, like most of the teal voters, they're one-issue voters, which is climate change, right? As an example. So you've got to make a decision as a voter because your voice counts in terms of whether you're going to be a one-issue voter or whether you're going to be a broader issue voter. Now, because the economy has been propped up with debt, and that debt has also led to inflation.
And about to go into a heap more.
Yep, and we've gone into, and obviously keeps blaming the war on Iran. No, we had domestic inflation, right? Our interest rates were going up off the back of this government spending make no mistake about it. When the government is the major buyer of anything, it's always inflationary.
That's why it's not cost of living; it's cost of government. Yeah. They are fueling the fire.
Correct. So, but this is why the conversations at the pub and the conversations around the dinner table around politics, they matter, because Labor is trying to sell you a narrative that they are helping first-time buyers get into the market. That's the narrative they're trying to sell. So the proof is going to be in the pudding in terms of whether property prices in big cities go down or not. And if they do go down, and if they do go down too much, which I don't expect them to do in the big cities, but I do expect to do in the regions. That's the remote regions, by the way, not commutables and satellite cities. So that still rings true in terms of our fundamentals. So, but if that is true, those people in the regions, it's not just affecting or letting all of those people who are investors, but what about the 70% of people who own the property in that market, who had to compete with those investors who artificially inflated the price in those markets? They're the ones who are going to be hurt by this policy setting. So I do expect that potentially Labor will be on the nose in the regions in terms of the next election. And will it affect cost of living? Well, the best way to fix cost of living is to grow the economy. And to grow the economy, you means you have to take less tax. And so are these settings growing the economy, or have we got this classic case of too much regulation in our economy, and the economy can't rip because effectively, again, it's supported by government spending as opposed to private spending. So they all matter in the grand scheme of what things... And make no mistake, the biggest game in town for property prices in the future is the economy and the economic activity that's generated in that town, that regional city, or that mega city as part of that story.
All right, so Ben, we've got some sentiment from our social media of what are the questions, and we've got heaps, and you are going to cover them in.
Well, obviously the ones we don't get through today. And if you've got any more questions, keep sending them in, because there will be lots of questions, and I'm sure. I mean, I know our business is getting lots of questions from our clients. Our tax team are getting lots of questions in terms of how. So it's everyone's just trying to. We've got a lot of knowns now, but we've still got a lot of known unknowns as part of this particular story. But it's getting clearer to us in terms of what we're going to be dealing with, and we've got to wait for the legislation to actually be done. There will be some wheeling and dealing, I suspect, on some of the legislation. But let's hit a couple of the questions. So
we've got some questions here, Ben, and we'll go through a few of them now. But the first one that I think is there's a couple of there's a few here that sort of give the sentiment of the style of question that we've been getting. But for first one here is from MP Borg on our TPC Instagram. For a person who has greater than 3 investment properties on long hold plan, how will these changes affect me?
Depends on where you're located. Those properties are located. I mean, the reality is if you've got well-located properties that have owner-occupier appeal.
Assume a TPC philosophy here, Ben. Go TPC philosophy and outlier philosophy. So if it's a TPC philosophy, you'd hold them.
Well, let's go through that. Negative gearing, I've got. I also, and we'll be talking a bit more about the value of your offset account now. If you've been loading money up on offsets against your investment properties, that is gold, because ultimately you'll be able to potentially move that money, which will allow you to get more access to some of those negative gearing benefits. So those offsets become things. But basic principle, negative gearing has been grandfathered, so that shouldn't affect you. You're still going to get that. And then ultimately your capital gains tax is going to be locked in from July of next year, and then you're going to move to an indexation model. So the gains that you've made, if you choose to sell,
that's the point.
If you choose to sell, but if you don't sell,
then the reality is, if you're retiring $3,000 a week, Ben, CGT doesn't affect you because you're holding your assets.
No, exactly.
And the negative gearing doesn't affect you because you've locked and loaded.
Correct. So again, it then becomes a bequeathment discussion and an inheritance discussion, and there's some estate planning that potentially goes with that as well. You know, your children could just inherit a house outright, and that's their principal home. So there's no tax payable at all.
And the government said that they won't change inheritance tax or death tax or messing with the family home, Ben, so they can be trusted, surely.
Yes. Well, this is almost like a death tax by stealth, but we won't go there.
Hey, this one is from Daniel McCusker, also on TPC Insta.
Yep.
Does this make new builds a viable option?
Great question. And
it's
said,
nuanced.
And we promised that we would circle back to this when you mentioned it earlier on today's ep. It's nuanced. If that new build is in an established area and you are getting a portion of land and you're not paying a developer premium or a seller premium, a buyer premium, because I suspect that we and other buyers agents will be running the ruler over these types of properties in these particular developed suburban locations of big cities. And, if we can get the price right for a customer, and we can obviously get a customer negative gearing and capital gains opportunities. So I think that will be an evolving story.
That's the price that you've got to pay to play the game in the
Yep.
middle ring after these new changes.
Yep.
You are going to have to pay the brand new price.
Yep.
Because we're saying low density.
Two-tier market potentially. Yep.
So medium and high. So to answer Daniel's question, does this make new builds a viable option? Medium and high, no.
No.
So can we be more clear?
House and land out in the sticks. No.
So therefore, let's rephrase this question. Does this make low density new builds a viable option? And our answer is probably. And you will have to pay a premium to play. Yep. And you have to pay the new car tax to the new car premium to play in this game. But in order for you to be able to qualify, get the negative gearing benefits, and importantly, not lose sight of why you invest in the first place, because growth is what you get out of the market, rent what keeps you in the market. It's a growth asset that you're chasing. Low density new builds have to be considered as a viable option.
Have to be. And again, I suspect over the next 24, 36 months, we will see businesses promoting that type of opportunity to people. And it's certainly, from our point of view, for our clients, we will obviously do some due diligence on whether that's a solution and a product that we might also consider for our clients into the future.
Ben, I've got a question here. It's more just a sentiment read, because it's almost just like rewind for the last 40 minutes. But this is from 2004 March on TPC Insta. How does taking away negative gearing and reducing CGT discount help the younger generation they claim to be helping? They need this for rent vesting and help getting into this very expensive market. So it's almost like a rhetorical question, but that's a sentiment.
Again, but let's talk about how we've defined rent vesting. Rent vesting was a stolen concept by the hyperbole buyers agents. We and Chris Gray and everyone who are the goats in terms of the OGs. Sorry,
self-complained goats.
Goats, wrong one. OGs. Goats. Apologies. wrong acronym. Been a long night, long day. Haven't had much sleep.
As long as they're not LeBron claiming to be the goat.
We're definitely not. I'll retract that statement. Sorry, just OGs. Thank you. Rent vesting was never buy a principal home.
Yeah.
Right. That was the true where you get to rent where you want to, and you just trade up and buy it. And if you've bought 10 or 15 negatively geared properties, that's locked away, so you're okay. But what was stolen in this was buyers agents, mortgage brokers who were telling clients, especially in Sydney markets and Melbourne markets, young people especially, let's go and trade your way into your $2 million property in Sydney, and let's do that through rent vesting, right? So just keep renting what you're doing, but we're going to go and leverage all your money into these regional towns, because that's the only way they could get in, because that's where you show me the borrowing power, number one driver of short-term property price growth, as you'll learn in my webinar, and that's what they did. Now they're meant to be trading out of those to get into the city market. They don't want to live in the middle of nowhere. They don't want to live in Wangaratta, or Echuca or Townsville or wherever. Right? They don't want to live there. So the reality is now they've got to trade out. And to your point you were making before, that's that supply spike that we're going to see. And guess what? No buyers.
Yeah.
So they're going to. That's why I'm really concerned about.
That's how you operationalise the phrase. When the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked. You're about to see what that actually means.
Yes.
You're about to see what that actually means.
Yeah, you are.
This one is from Shane Wilkinson.
Yep.
Are there any changes to negative gearing on a property purchase pre-2026, which I then knock down and replace with 2 dwellings post-2027? Is there a difference if these 2 dwellings are on a single block or subdivided into separate Torrens titles? I think the important part of the question that I think our audience needs to understand is replace with 2 dwellings. You've got to add to supply.
Yes.
So just for clarity for our audience, if you have an investment property that you knock down and turn it into one investment property, that does not add to supply. Therefore, under what was handed down last night, that doesn't qualify. But if you knock it down and turn it into two or more, by definition, you are adding to supply.
Correct.
Therefore qualifying.
So reward for the capital that funds new supply.
Yes.
Which was in the Treasury notes there as well. So new build status.
All right, we'll try and find one more, Ben, here that will help. Will my existing properties be grandfathered for both negative gearing and CGT? Yes for negative gearing, no for CGT. Yep. Oh, and importantly, and we touched on it before, but the quarantining that you did have pre-85 is no longer. From the 1st of July 2027, your quarantining will end, and then you will move into from the valuation at that point going forward until you have a capital gains tax event, you will be subject to capital gains tax. That's a big job for those people who, prior to Keating bringing it in 85, they had this quarantining that they would have assumed would have lasted forever.
Yep. So, I mean, obviously they've locked in all of those gains to this point. But the question will be, with rising interest rates, sentiment and expectation in the negative space now, that everyone will probably be racing to try and get a valuation today if it's a falling market. But unfortunately, what we don't know, the known unknown here is, when does that valuation have to get done?
Yeah.
Because if I'm in a regional town, I'll probably want to value it today, because that's going to drop off at least double digits in my mind, right? And so, but I'm like, oh, damn it, because it's going down. And what can you use? I mean, can you use an AVM tool?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. What qualifies?
You're going to be shopping around to the different AVM tools to see if you can get
Or you're going to get AI to give you a
the best
valuation. Because how are they going to keep up in the volume that's going to be required on the amount of dwellings across the country?
Yeah. So you'll be able to use your rates notice, potentially. Well, that'll be a low ball, right? So you won't want to use that. So, and then you're going to be paying a valuer to go and value it, and you're going to be going, hey, I'd like a favourable valuation. I mean, this is what Treasury were debating before when they were saying, oh, we needed some time to do that. But you're still putting a line in the sand, right? And unfortunately, it's going to be, if it's a self-declaration, what are they going to do there? Like, oh yeah, no, I've loaded up. It's as dumb as the 296 ruling around unrealised gains.
Yeah.
We're in that sort of same space, so that's going to be
more unintended consequences. All right, this last one. If you already own an investment property, if you already own an owner-occupied property, and want to transition it to an investment property later, can that be negatively geared? That's interesting, because the definition says for properties held. It doesn't say for properties that are currently being used as an investment property.
Yeah. So my expectation is a yes on that. So I do expect that will be one of the loopholes. Well, not so much a loophole, but I mean the 6-year rule, if I do have to move for work or whatever, and I then rent it out and I've still got a debt against that property, then that is technically deductible. So I would suspect that they would keep that going because, again, if people have to move for work, it wouldn't necessarily be in the spirit of what you're trying to do. So no, if you own the property, you've got that opportunity to negative gear.
All right, Ben. So we've got to the pointy end of the podcast. So what? What do we do now? So what's the message that that we want to send to both clients and for our listener base on what do you do now?
Well, I think it is about, don't overreact until we know what the legislation will show. I think we're pretty confident in terms of where it will land.
Yep.
So you're going to need to seek some advice potentially, get an update potentially on the situation. But if you've got a clear plan, and that plan was to buy whole, I wouldn't necessarily be changing that in a general sense, but I'd probably be wanting to check in at some point in terms of, remember, we've now elevated our location does 90% of that heavy lifting. So I'd be want to having a look at where that location is. I mean, what has also rung true on this is, for now, the principal place of residence is sacrosanct. It is the most...
it's the greatest gift in the tax code.
It is the greatest gift. It is like the tax advantages you get on a principal place of residence. So play that out. We're talking about investment grade versus investment stock. investment grade is what owner-occupiers want to buy and in the locations that they want to buy them. And now there's going to be pent-up demand by people who want to buy in those locations because they will potentially add value in those locations to the existing land that they have there because it's capital gains tax-free. So that in my mind put more pressure on that prime land than what it does in potentially land that that we refer to in our latest book as entry level. So in terms of that, so yeah, I would be thinking about that more intently, because if I'm thinking about will capital growth continue on land over time, unless the economy breaks down in the area that you live in, then you will continue to see land appreciation. But there's definitely maybe 2 or 3 tier markets that will start to evolve themselves as we watch the human behaviour play out.
And I also think that planning is more important than ever now, because you've got to be able to model the numbers, and what will impact some people will be a different impact to others, whether you're self-employed and have got flexibility around how you earn your income and distribute it versus if you're employed and work for someone else and have limited ability around that, what sort of borrowing capacity impact that's going to have on you, what your time horizon is. Because I think that, history doesn't repeat itself, people repeat history. So it's probably history says that changed the rules in 85, came back in 87 with incentives. So we've obviously got to go through a couple of years of whatever plays out. You and I have a lens on how we think that'll play out, but the reality will be the teacher here. But essentially what you will find is that treating investors like they have no discernment around what particular asset they will buy. It's just fraught with hubris. Like, they will leave. The ones who exist will have a smaller pool. There'll be more demand. They will increase their costs. And unfortunately, what will happen is the catalyst for the rent increase was the decision that happened on budget night. But the person who will be still held accountable is the greedy landlord, who the only way that from budget night onwards, the only way they can afford it without the tax incentive help is to actually get more out of the market to fund the costs. Otherwise, they won't do it.
No. So commercial property will start to get a little more oxygen, and then entities will also start to get a little more oxygen. So self-managed super funds.
Yes.
There's going to be a lot of spruiking around.
Companies.
Companies. So those 3 things are still the unknown thing. We already know that Labor has started to flag changes to self-managed super fund lending for residential property purchases. So they're just collapsing, like what they've done for rental. They're just collapsing all of that. Like, they're manipulating the market so much. This is why the economy is stuffed under a Labor government, usually, is because, second and third terms of Labor governments, you always get higher interest rates, you always get higher debts, and you get a falling economy because they just want to spend so much and help so many people that they don't understand the one job that they need to do is get out of the way of the economy and let it cook. As part of that. So I think from that point of view, that's what we're
not
going
bad
to
for
see.
someone who wasn't going to talk politically today
well,
on this podcast.
You led me into it. So I sort of had to exercise my demons.
My fault. But we did propose, you specifically, in at great length, proposed an alternate. There was an alternate path.
Yeah, there's definitely alternate.
There was
paths.
phasing capital gains tax rates up for people and to reward people who stayed in for the long term.
Take the speculators
You'd always
out.
said around 2 or 3 investment properties and incentives after that. You're always in favour of. Like, you've never heard from our mouth say go and get 100 properties.
No, take the speculators out, and that would fix some of the affordability problems in the regions, right?
And allow Middle Australia to get 2 or 3 investment properties and then create disincentives for negative gearing after that.
2 or 3 in concert with your super. Held for the medium long. That's financial security right there. Well, that doesn't change. But it's now you're going to have to put a little bit more in terms of to hold it, like what we say. But you'll still get your capital growth.
Hard now is
growth.
easy later. A little bit harder now still means easier later.
Agreed.
Well, mate.
Mate, on that note, I think that you summarised that beautifully.
There we go. So, all right. Well,
Now, just before we do go, mate, what have you been up to? We haven't, obviously you've been away for a couple of months. What's been happening?
Oh, well, you and I have had this conversation. You're coming at the investor market through Picker.
Yep.
You've previously had the role from Pipper.
Yep.
But the buyer's agent industry is, I think, had something to
Cowboy country.
to blame here, right? So.
Yep.
So Veronica reached out to me, during the sabbatical and said, "Why don't we try and provide some leadership here for the buyer's agent industry?" So, we're just we're putting together a bit of a program to help the buyer's agents. Actually, there's a lot of buyer's agents that are in the market who actually don't know what it looks like to run a buyer's agency business where you are more than just marketing. How to execute. How to represent your buyer, how to run a profitable business, how to do all these things that come with being a buyer's agent in a sustainable market. We'll be able to announce something soon. Maybe I can come back on the couch and talk about that. But ultimately, the intention is to provide that leadership so that you're doing it from Picker, we're doing it from the buyer's agency, Pippa's doing it from the industry, and hopefully we're all sort of colluding as the OGs, or in your words, the goats.
I won't leave that down, will I? Just got my acronym wrong after no sleep.
We're only serious. We don't ever play with you, but So some of us OGs is if we can collectively sort of triangulate and help provide a market that's sustainable for 20 years, not for, I am concerned at some of the lack of humility. Just the total and utter lack of humility of some of the operators that have, in part, it's up to us at a subjective level. It just hasn't helped in any way, and it's helped them enormously. And what we do know is that people who run businesses and have an advantage over people that are employed by someone else. And so it's easier for people who run a business to go out there and lack humility around some of the things that they're doing within their business, within our industry. And so we're trying to...
my other criticism, if I was pointing and looking at them, they've got no financial services knowledge, right? Like, what's the investment philosophy? Well, if the investment philosophy is just trade and just push values higher and artificially inflate, that's not an investment philosophy. I mean, like, what's your principles around goals, objectives, risk profiles, and what is the most optimized investment to make meeting? Like, all of that stuff, just unfortunately for this generation of they haven't been trained or explained. We should never weaponize
the roof over our heads as purely an investment vehicle.
Never.
Its primary function is always to act as shelter, and we should protect that.
Yes.
And I know we're aligned on this for our audience. We should protect the sacrosanct nature of the safety and security that people have with the roof over their head. But there are some people in the market, and I'm talking to our audience, not to you. There are some people in our market who just don't want to own their own home. They're transitions. There's a ton of reasons why they're going to be renters. So it makes sense to give those who are aspiring the opportunity to supply those. But once it becomes we've lost sight of providing for the renters, we've lost sight of the fact that it's a roof over our head, and it just becomes a wealth creation vehicle for wealth creation's sake. You can see why you have reactions on budget night like what we've got here. So
if it doesn't provide a social good, we'll lose our social license. That's effectively what's been happening over this time. So we still love the idea of Australians owning their own home.
100%. But some people don't.
I know. Some people are choosing not to, but if they're told that, you don't, you just go and build wealth and, you sit in front of your Ferraris and it's all that, my God, I can't stand that stuff. And it's all of those influences that that you and I take on in terms of that story.
Well, they should hopefully, they won't, but part of what happened is as a result of what they've been doing.
There's no philosophy, no investment philosophy that they teach their client about risk and also about losing money. Because at the end of the day, if those regional markets collapse and those people have got negative equity, guess what those buyers agents are going to do? They're just going to turn the sign off. And we've seen it with the other Spruikers before when they sold all those house and land packages and off the plan apartments, and those values collapsed. They just shut up shop. They just went missing, and so you couldn't get remediation in terms of sue them or anything like that, because they just shut the business up and ran off. And so what's going to happen here, if it is as bad in some of those regional areas as it could get, and that's all about who believes the story or not, because if everyone believes that there's going to be a run on the market, there will be a run on the market, make no mistake, because they're so shallow. Then that's where they're going to, who do they blame? Well, they'll blame the buyer. They've gone underground, they've shut their business up. So then they blame the mortgage broker, and the mortgage broker, because they were referred to. So, or they've got an asset, they've got something to come after. So Phil Tarrant and I were talking about this just the other day to sort of say, if this blows up in those regional areas, the consumers are going to want to blame someone and try and get remedied. And so that will open up the idea of these cowboys and the property investment advice and the investment advice they were giving around trust and all. That could turn into an inquiry and hopefully some new regulation if it's as bad as what it might get.
Well, you and I, there's a couple of things. I'm proud of the fact that in our timeline of our journey, Ben, we've seen off a lot of the Spruikers that had big names at the time, and then they've gone. But that provides so that's nice to be around as the OGs for that.
Yep.
But I guess the part that's really painful is we've looked clients who not through us, but who have come to us to help them fix bad property investment advice. We've looked them in the eye and seen the pain that negative equity and the lack of hope for what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like. I've got to tell you, for those listening who have not ever had that context, it is excruciating.
We've had to see nurses have to go work in regional towns and 14 years of being in negative equity just to get back on their feet.
Just get to ground zero.
For those regional markets that they bought in when they collapsed the last time. So it is a horrendous situation. And look, we don't normally say for anyone out there, but if you want a second opinion in terms of what your situation is, reach out to us at Empower Wealth. That's
reach
important.
out to us or someone who's in the OG,
correct,
in the OG community, who have been consistent. Clearly we'd love you to come and see us, but
ask the question.
Just talk to the people who've been consistent in their message over a long period of time, who've seen off a lot of these cycles and a lot of these sort of fluctuations. That's who you want to talk to.
Look, and I'm going to be releasing a lot of data on regional markets. So you're going to see. I've already started releasing some of the start of it. So we've called it that it's going to be problematic. And if that continues to run up, there will be obviously further challenges in those areas. So we'll have more to say about that in upcoming episodes. So let's wrap it up. Obviously, we're not one and done here. Next week, we'll have the Chief Economist, David Robinson from Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. Evan Lucas will be joining us as well. We will take a broader dive into the economics of the, what's it going to mean for the economy, what's it going to mean for jobs, and how it looks more broadly. So we'll get their independent opinions on that. We also have our 600 episode coming up, which I'm pleased to announce. We've got John McGrath on the 600 episode. As one of Australia's, now he is a GOAT, one of Australia's greatest in the real estate market.
And we've been trying to get him on for years.
We have, so it's a nice little celebration for our 600th. And of course, we'll have Julia Hartman back on in the lead up to the tax season, but also to get her opinions and views in terms of what's happening around the tax policies around that as well. So we will continue to evolve this conversation. We'll continue to see where the trends are going, but don't do anything rash just yet until you sort of know the playing field. Stay close to the data. We'll teach you how to look at that, and hopefully you'll be able to navigate through this uncertain time for the next few months, and then hopefully after that you'll go, the dust has settled. I know where I stand, and I can pursue what my ultimate goal is, which is financial transformation towards lifestyle by design. So. And just a final shout out for those people who want to register for the webinar, thepropertycouch.com.au/register now. You'll find the link there to get in the wait list for that webinar coming up. Mate, great to have you back.
Thank you for having me, mate.
Couch crew.
Hashtag flagmantle.
Flagmantle.
But mate, thanks for inviting me back. It's for such a meaningful period in the history of investing in property, I think it makes sense that you and I got to rip it again.
Agreed. Thanks, mate. Okay, until next week, everyone, remember, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. So let's get some knowledge, people. Bye for now.
Hey folks, Opti here, your smart money sidekick inside more. Just one quick thing before we sign off. If you're new to the Property Couch community, welcome. One quick tip to help you get the most value from the show. Our first 20 episodes cover the foundations we build on every week. And yes, listening on 1.5 speed is totally acceptable. If you're short on time, download our free binge guide. It distills those episodes into one easy read with heaps of visual diagrams, alongside free tools inside More, your all-in-one financial home, to help you organize your money and plan your next best move. Check out all the links in our show description. And just a quick reminder before you go, anything we cover on this podcast is general in nature. It's not considered to be financial advice, and we certainly recommend that you seek out professional advice before making any financial decisions. Once again, everything mentioned is linked in the show description. Ready when you are. Catch you next week.